Let's talk a little bit about the graphics interchange format. So it's been around for quite a while, and despite its age, it may not have ever been quite as popular as it is now, although it's enjoyed popularity for quite some time. It was created in the late 80s. You might pronounce it GIF, you might pronounce it GIF. So the G stands for graphics, so you have the people who want to pronounce it as GIF. The original creator pronounces it as GIF. Both of them are considered correct. Now, that's not really what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is sort of the way that we see it used and some of the limitations of it. So obviously it's super popular, right? You see it everywhere. You see it in social media, you can send it in texts, you can see it on the web, etc. One of the things that led to its popularity was the web itself. So when the internet was first still coming around, there weren't that many file formats that you could use online in an actual website. You could use BMPs, you could use JPEGs, you could use GIFs. Those were pretty much all that you could use. BMPs were way too large, they took way too long to load. JPEGs were pretty good, they had good quality, but they didn't support animation, and they still don't, and they don't support transparency either. So GIFs do support animation, and they support transparency, so that made them pretty popular. They were the best way to use transparency until like the early 2000s when PNG gained support, and even then PNG took a little while to be supported across multiple browsers, and of course for people to actually update their browsers and their machines to be able to use it. So GIF has been a long-standing file format, and it probably will remain so. Now, there are a few limitations to GIFs, and that's one of the bits that I want to talk about. Really, really large GIFs and really, really long GIFs can have a little bit of trouble, but you can make that a little bit easier by just stringing multiple GIFs together. The next thing, maybe the more important thing that I want to talk about, is what goes on with the colors. So looking at just our primary colors of light here, red, green, and blue, if I want to save this as a GIF, I want to show you what happens to the colors. So if I do save for web, JPEG, even JPEG you see a little bit of compression and issues, right? The color space for a GIF is a bit different, but that's not actually what we're going to see here. This looks like the color space isn't that great, right? You can see all this banding here. The color space for GIFs is actually fairly decent, but it can only use 256 colors at a time. And so it's not that there's a set 256, it's that it looks at what colors you're using and then decides based on that. So an image like this one, where we're using pretty much all the color space, you're going to have a lot of this banding. It's going to try to guess what colors to use based on what colors it sees most frequently, and then it tries to approximate the color that it didn't use by combining dots of the available ones next to each other, right? Sort of this pointillism style. If we hop over to this image, this is just a screenshot of the color bar, not this version of it. Let's see. This version of it, okay? Just a screenshot of that. If I do save for web with this one, switch from JPEG to GIF, here you can see sort of that same effect, right? We're losing a lot of colors in there. JPEG does a better job. PNG 24 does a better job. So remember I also mentioned that GIF supported transparency and JPEG didn't, and that GIF was the best way until PNGs came about. So you would have some people who might want to do designs on a web page and they want a transparency, and so you would use a GIF for that. But you can see, depending on what you're wanting to do, if you have an image that has lots of color and a wide variety of colors, you're going to lose some of that, or you may lose some of that. And when PNG came along, specifically PNG 24, because PNG 8 has the same issue, PNG 24 came along, and this allowed much smoother transitions. Now the file size is bigger. Notice on the bottom 35 kilobytes down there. If I hop over to the JPEG, you can see here it's only 4, so like a magnitude of difference. GIFs can be inefficient too. If I hop over to the GIF, it's probably similar to the PNG. Yeah, it's also not great. Okay, so I've mentioned that you lose colors, right? And that's obviously clear here. We can see here the 256, we can see dither, we can see diffusion. This changes a little bit of how it's trying to deal with the reduction of colors. All right, so you can play with some of those. You can see here also 256, so we can change the maximum number, but it won't go over 256. We can drop it down to be less, but we can't increase it to be more, right? So, question being, does GIF have a very small color space, or does it actually only support so many colors at a time, like I was stating? Let's hop over to this image. I've taken the primary colors of light and the primary colors of pigment, and I've made these little bars, obviously. For each one, I've made them fade into white, black, and transparency. So if I do export save for web here, you can see the JPEG version. Make this a little bit bigger, and that'll work. You can see the PNG 24 version, which supports transparency, right? And then you can see the GIF version, and we've got some issues there, right? Both with transparency, although you can see it supports, and also with this color banding into the white and black, right? We can play with how it tries to handle that, but none of them are really that great, right? Now, let me show you that it's not that it doesn't support a wide color space, it's that it has a limited number of colors it can provide at any one time. So instead of doing this whole image, what if we just grab one band? So let's go ahead and crop this. And now if I do save for web, notice the difference. It is a lot smoother, right? So it's not that it doesn't support a wide color space, and I mean, it's not perfect. You still have a little bit in there, but it's really that it can only handle so many colors. Let's try, instead of doing a whole band, let's try just doing part of a band. Maybe just red through white and red through transparency. So you can see here that it can be pretty smooth, right? So we have 256 colors, whether we do diffusion or pattern or noise, it is pretty smooth here. Now, it's not smooth in the transparency, right? The transparency still isn't that great. So if we try doing that, and of course, like, that may be one area where GIF maybe doesn't shine greatly. Ah, here we go. We also have this here, no transparency dither, and we can play with some of these here too, right? So it's still not great, but it can sort of try to approximate some transparency. What it's actually doing with the transparency dither is there isn't actually differing levels of transparency with GIF. It's either transparent or it's not. So just like with these, where it was trying to create the colors it's missing by sort of like a pointillism style, right? By placing different other colors beside each other, it's doing the same thing with the transparency. It's trying to create the illusion of that transparency by putting transparent dots in between dots of color at a greater amount and at a lesser amount. So transparency is still not great, but you can see, hopefully, that GIFs do support a pretty wide color range. So what do you do about that, right? Are you just super limited to colors? To some extent, yes. You can't use a full spectrum in an animation with GIF easily because you are going to lose some color, right? You're going to lose some as it's bringing that down to the 256 max. That being said, that doesn't mean that there aren't other solutions. One thing that we could do, if we really wanted to recreate this whole thing in GIF, although issue with the transparency, I could crop each chunk off, right? into separate images and save each one as a GIF, right? And then re-put them together in some other format, whether that be a video format or on a web page using tables or divs or something like that. We could do it that way. And that was a technique and is a technique that is used. I was going to show you that that works, but as I was loading up the Wikipedia page, I noticed that they had that example already on here, although not my example, but a similar one, right? So this image here illustrates that idea. If you try to use the whole thing as a GIF, you're going to get that banding. You can divide it into segments where each one has less, and that should provide smoother transitions. Although that middle should still be pretty bad, right? Because you still have a pretty broad color range there. But I think you see that kind of in the middle there. You get that little bit of a change there, right? It goes from super smooth here to sort of, let's see it. Right there, you saw that change, right? So you did lose some colors there. So that's another way that you could simulate more colors than it will actually load, is by saving different parts in different GIFs and then just aligning them together.